Welcome to Happy Times and Places, a positively inclined Doctor Who episode commentary podcast in which I, Toby Haydock, ask a friend to choose a Doctor Who story and to secretly select their favourite things about it. I have to watch, commentate along, drop a few facts and observations, and try to guess what those favourite things are.
Hi, Toby. Thanks for inviting me to this podcast. I am very honoured to be here talking about one of my favourite stories of all time. When Toby first emailed me, the first thought came to my mind was I want to do the Romans, and I was so happy no one had done it yet. Originally, I watched Torchwood, then I watched the new series of Doctor Who, and then I watched the classic series. So I have a really weird relationship with learning old Doctor Who. So when I was in high school, I only had like one or two friends who had watched the classic series, and they were very much one of those old guard where they were like, oh no, you couldn't possibly like the Romans, no. So I felt like I couldn't like this story. So when I eventually got to this story, I approached it saying, you know what, ignore what everyone else said. I'm going to enjoy it how I want to enjoy it. And I sat down and I couldn't stop laughing throughout the entire thing. And at that moment I thought, oh no, this is what I love about Doctor Who. This is why it's my era of the show. So I thought this would be perfect for this podcast where it's talking about a more positive side of the show when a lot of people have a lot of negative things to say about the Romans. For each individual episode, I've chosen a different way of approaching my favourite moment. For episode 1, I have chosen a scene, and for episodes 2, 3, and 4, I have chosen dialogue. And then for my fifth and final moment, I'm talking about the entire story as a whole, and I've chosen one particular scene, which is my absolute favourite part of the entire story. So good luck, Toby.
What has the Romans ever done for us? Well, it's done this podcast. Hello. And I'm grateful to Josh, who flatters me by being on this podcast, because Josh is one of the new people who has used the medium of the internet to very skillfully and effectively, those videos that Josh does are amazing, convey their enjoyment and enthusiasm and knowledge of the show, and is really an innovator in the medium of the internet. And so I'm flattered that they've been associated very much with this unplugged, old school, one person and a microphone kind of thing, rather than that brilliant sort of, monologues where you cut within the monologue and the person jumps back slightly, but it keeps the flow, and it means that you can do several takes and choose your best bits, and it's the way that things shoot without having to worry about whether the picture completely matches and stuff, because we've kind of got over that, and it's a very modern way of doing things, and that's what Josh even did on the introductory video there. And has done also, and of course, typically because they put themselves out there in the world of YouTube, I think occasionally gets a bit of stick as well, which must be very dispiriting when all you're doing is, conveying your love for the show. So I am very happy to embrace Josh as somebody who could easily dismiss me as one of the old fuddy-duddies for coming and joining me as one of the earliest people to sort of be asked and send something pretty much instantaneously. So I'm sorry it's been hanging around in the archives of Happy Times and Places for a while, but I mix and match the stories and release things depending on when I fancy watching them, or what the last release was, or what I've got lined up. So it's no reflection on Josh that this one was probably recorded when the universe was less than half its present size. I'm reminded by Josh's introduction that people are sniffy about the Romans. That surprises me every time I hear it, and then it ceases to be a surprise, because I remember actually seeing it on I mentioned it in another podcast recently, the all-time clangers and all-time classics, but all-time clangers in DWB, and I think the Romans was quite high on the Hartnell list, and I think the general feeling, because nobody was really watching the episodes in those days because they weren't available to most of us, was that if it had the audacity to be funny, it must not work. And I think a few of the interviews with the people who'd started to be interviewed, like Verity Lambert and Christopher Barry, I remember Christopher Barry had said he thought that the burning of Rome had not been particularly successful, and I think Lambert had decided the out-and-out comedy had been an experiment that hadn't quite worked. So I think that gave fans, who'd seen it once, 10, 15 years ago, and were now, scoring things out of 10 or whatever, went, that one. And historicals have always suffered as well, I think, a bit. But now I think we can see everything, honours even out a little bit, and it's all a matter of taste in terms of, how good the productions are. There's not an awful lot of difference to the modern eye between anything that goes on in the 60s, really, and that fire effects in episode 4 is no worse than a lot of other things that surround it. So Christopher Barry's memory of his disappointment at that shouldn't really affect us now. I'm also interested that Josh clearly went to school with lots of or the Doctor Who fan friends from the early days were fusty old Englishmen going, "Oh no, you shouldn't like the Romans." Was Josh in the green room of a rep theatre and the night? I don't think that's very good. I like that. I like Josh's voice, the dismissive fustiness of people who dislike the Romans. But because as I watch this. It has just been released as part of the Season 2 box set on Blu-ray, which I'm flattered and pleased to have had a contribution on, doing a documentary about David Whittaker wearing an outfit combo I now regret, that seemed like what I wanted to wear at the time, and I just think it looks really messy, and it will of course be there forever and will haunt me and cast a shadow over a piece of work that loads of people have been very, very nice about, and all I could think about is, why did I put that shirt on, which I couldn't do up, and have that inside a jacket and outside a t-shirt, and have a neckerchief that was deliberately sort of slightly floppy and voluminous by its design, and therefore look a bit of a mess, and those burgundy trousers, which were new, aren't quite the colour scheme that I thought they were going. And instead of just going, I made a nice documentary that people liked about David Whittaker. But Whittaker is important because, of course, he's just stepped away, or is just about to stepped away from being script editor, and Spooner, who wrote this, becomes the new script editor. And I think whilst Whittaker is very much the architect of much of Doctor Who as we know it, and certainly many of the stronger points of that first year, I think without Spooner, perhaps Doctor Who wouldn't be the show that it is today, because Spooner with his comedic chops, and that's very interesting that both of those script editors are vital in different ways. And I think Whittaker is probably rightly seen as the greater figure in the history of Doctor Who, and probably a more sort of grown-up and literary writer. But that's because we all think comedy is easy and somehow beneath us. I speak as a professional stand-up comedian. Whereas, of course, comedy is really hard, and you have to be quite clever to do it. But we have a sort of mistrust of comedy, or we have a mistrust of comedy that takes itself too seriously. Therefore, the comics that we love have to have this kind of veneer of it's just I'm just a clown. Whereas, of course, you're not just anything if you can hold a room full of people, in hilarity. For an hour, or write a script that is constantly serving you with laugh after laugh after laugh after laugh. That it's not just something you just sort of rattle off, But we view comedy as somehow a lesser art form than a story that is perhaps more philosophical. And also, we as Doctor Who fans, Doctor Who is terribly serious, of course, but Doctor Who wouldn't survive without its sense of humour. And yet, if it doesn't take itself seriously enough, that's fatal. So there's lots of interesting stuff to talk about with the Romans, which is why we're 7 minutes in and I haven't actually started the episode yet. Now watch me run out of things to say. So thanks to Josh, who I really like as a presence, as an energy, as a commentator, and is a very inventive and gifted communicator using the modern mediums of video messaging on the internet. I am now going to talk into a microphone and watch the television, which are about two technological things I can just about muster, sometimes both at the same time. And the slave traders are going to open for business in 3, 2, 1. I don't know why I did that massive monologue at the beginning where I could have been saying some of that stuff during the episode itself. This is quite a special story for me because it was one of the first stories that I did a DVD commentary for. At the time, it could well have been one of the only two. I did this and The Rescue at the same time. I can't believe there is no photographic evidence of that. I was quite shocked to turn up and to find that there was nobody there with a camera, and it was the days before iPhones and stuff. So anyway, and here's, we start with the cliffhanger from the previous story, The Rescue, which I did for Happy Times and Places ages and ages ago. The wonderful Andrew Ellard, pointing out, I was interested, it was because having done that and commentated upon The Rescue, and said, it's a murder mystery with only one suspect, Andrew quite rightly points out, well, it's not really a murder mystery. It doesn't set itself up as that. It's a different kind of story. It's only that we now view it, hindsight can sort of make us take aspects for granted or have a view of a story that is kind of wrong. And I think The Romans is, maybe suffers from that a little bit as well, because it's seen as Doctor Who's first attempt at out-and-out comedy. But I think it's more interesting than that. And, of course, we have the cliffhanger, and it's a great cliffhanger, the TARDIS falling off a cliff. And I remember a friend of mine, one of the first sort of older fans that I met, and I didn't really like the idea of I remember being really surprised at the end of An Unearthly Child when I watched it as part of the Five Faces of Doctor Who, when they had the cliffhanger leading into the Daleks. And I remember thinking, but that's harder to categorise, because I liked each story being a story, and suddenly if you're leading into the next one, that blurs the lines. It's a bit like all these doctors we have now. There's no reason for me to be uneasy about them, but it's because it makes it harder for me to categorise in my head, and that makes my sort of brain space slightly muddier than I would like it to be. There's no sort of artistic justification for and yet I also like the fact that each story leads into the other, because it means that they're constantly keeping the adventuring going. The writers are having to be inventive. You end the story and you go, now I've got to come up with a piece of jeopardy out of nowhere, because we've essentially just got rid of all of the jeopardy. And that's quite fun, seeing how inventive different writers are and how they approach luring us into the next story. But it does mean that no story you can quite watch on your own, and that's then me having an eye on, but what if I was watching this with the casual viewer, and they'd go, well, but is that story not ended then? You go, no, it's because... But I also remember, and this is where the story ended for me, because for ages I had episode 1 on the end of an E180 that had got something else on. I think it had got the last 3 episodes or something, and then the Aztecs, and then this was the first 6 or 7 minutes or whatever, and it ran out here. So for ages I had like the first half dozen minutes of the Romans and nothing else, which meant I took then ages to get the rest of it, because I kind of I've got a feel for it. I've seen a bit of it. I own a bit of it. Yes, I remember this friend of mine, Dan, one of the first sort of older Doctor Who fans I met. He said he didn't like the cliffhangers leading from one story to the other, because it made it unbelievable. It suggested that everywhere they went there was danger. Whereas if we only check in on Doctor Who when he's having adventures, you could go, well, it might have had a year passed without anything happening. That is more believable than going from frying pan to fire. But of course this does both, because we have the cliffhanger that it then dispenses with and goes, actually no, that was fine, just fell off the cliff, they were fine. And this story takes pains to point out at various instances in this episode where they go, and we've been here for months. And I love that. I love the idea that they've come to Rome and they haven't immediately started adventuring. What they've done is they've found this abandoned villa, and again they drop that in case the viewer's going, hang on, where did they find that villa? And they go to great pains to point that out for the cynical viewer, and establish that situation. And I like that. I like that my beloved TARDIS crew have had a bit of time doing what you would do if you were able to, is set up house in an abandoned villa in Rome, and eat grapes and get hammered. And I like all the stuff that the Doctor did in that scene with Ian, talking about the pipes instead of the aqueducts, and throwing a bit of educational stuff into there. And here are the slave traders of the title, Sevchiria and Didius. Didius is played by Nick Evans. It took me a while as a kid to put 2 and 2 together and realise that Nick Evans, who is the Slither, and Nicholas Evans, who plays Didius, so Slither in Dalek Invasion of Earth, were one in the same. So yeah, Nick Evans has been rewarded for his turn as the Slither with his face on camera and one of the rare beard but no moustache combinations in Doctor Who and indeed TV drama as a whole. And he's in the first episode of this in human form, having been a Dalek and the Slither, and he comes back as an uncredited Dalek in Power of the Daleks as well. But let's not get into that. And I've done, so he did the commentary for this when I did the commentary for the Romans, of which we have, and the Rescue, of which we have no photographic evidence. I made sure to bring cameras to future ones, but even then, there are not as many photos of any of the commentaries I did that I would like there to be. For some, there's like one from each episode or whatever. And I would love it if there'd been budget or time to think of, or bodies, or I'm sure anybody would have loved to turn up and bring a camera. So Simon Harry's a friend of mine, eventually used to come to watch and brought his camera, but it took a while. And here's Margot Thomas as the stall holder, who I think is mentioned in one of the Watchers or Nick Pegg's columns in Doctor Who magazine, because he worked with her on a play, and she was still going into the 1990s. Had a long career. One episode in this, never troubles Doctor Who again. In fact, there's lots of people in this episode who are only in this one episode. The Romans is one of those stories where the guest cast sort of come and go, which is why I think Derek Sidney here, who ended up in America, actually. When I was first looking at IMDb, he was still alive and kicking. He died in 2000, but was based over there in the States and working in or volunteering in theatre in San Diego. He'd retired as an actor in 1990. But I think this character was supposed to be a one-off character. He's one of the two slave traders, and he ends up sort of, when you get to Rome, becoming the kind of lead henchman at Nero's court for no real reason. I think I read somewhere, but it's a long time ago. But I think my instinct that is that him all the way through, because I hadn't quite worked out that it was that it had been a series of characters, or one or two different characters, and they'd gone, there's too many characters in this, so let's make the slave trader that we meet, who's a bit villainous in part one, be the guy who hangs around and does sort of villainous rabble rousing and stuff like that in the later episodes in Rome. So it's not everybody sort of jumping in and out, because I think he's the only character in all 4 episodes actually. Because everyone else sort of comes and goes a little bit, including here Maximus Battalion, who's about to go because Barry Jackson's mute assassin is about to kill him. It's quite grim. Now, because Roman times, I've just been watching The Caves of Androzani, which is a grim and dirty and dangerous Doctor Who story, and you could make a Doctor Who story with the same kind of atmosphere and pragmatic and cynical view of the expendability of life set in Roman times. But instead, they decide to do Doctor Who's sort of first and perhaps only farce, and I love it for that. And I love all of this stuff about larks' tongues and baked pomegranates. They do that again in the Fires of Pompeii, don't they? Where it seems to me a little bit more self-conscious, but I think it's because it's the Roman characters doing it, saying, "Oh, could I have some bees in honey?" or whatever it is that they ask for, and it's sort of almost like they're telling each other what Romans have to eat, which seems to me slightly more artificial than when it's done here, where they're sort of chatting about an alien food stuff, if you like, and educating us at the same time. And Hartnell is really rises to the challenge. They all rise to the challenge of the comedy. They all play the genre, but rarely, I think, without stepping into the bounds of ludicrousness. I mean, the Doctor's a slightly different kettle of fish, because he can be a character of extremes anyway. But I seem to recall in this episode he sort of varies between being slightly clueless, getting the wrong end of the stick, and being very wily, as the comedy requires, which is kind of naughty, because comedy should, the joke should arise organically. But the beauty is, of course, the Doctor can be any of those extremes of character, because he's this eccentric alien. and therefore it kind of gets away with it, and you clearly enjoy the fact that Hartnell is enjoying it and his co-stars are enjoying it, so it's all rather infectious, but there's a fine line there as well, because you don't want to watch actors having too much fun if you're not included in the fun. That seems a little bit like they're amusing themselves and not you, but I don't think that happens here. I think this is fun, and I think it's quite infectious. I love this team. Vicky's only just joined, and of course I love that bit earlier on when she's talking to Barbara and she said, I thought you just said you had loads of adventures and all I've done here is sit in a villa. And I do love that idea that they when they said, yeah, come along because all we do is have adventures. I love the way she's so excited and she does that jumping about and sort of young enthusiasm thing. I adore Ian and Barbara, and Hartnell is on great form. And of course, comedy is an essential part of Doctor Who. Comedy is hard to get right, because if you put too much comedy into Doctor Who, you ruin it. You don't want to break the spell. You don't want to be too arch about it. If you're postmodern and winking at the audience, it's a bit smug. You don't really like it, and it doesn't help with the drama. And of course, this has to be genuinely dangerous in places, and I think that is, and it has to be genuinely funny in places, and that takes a lot of, nifty judgment. And at this period in Doctor Who's history, apart from, Hartnell has funny bits and stuff, but and there are some comic characters in Marco Polo, but that I think are slightly more organic, because Marco Polo is quite a sort of lyrical script, so it has those they're sort of more colourful characters, really. Whereas, I don't know why I think, say, Wang Lo in Marco Polo is less of an arch comic device than the Roadworks Overseer in the Reign of Terror, which is what I was building to, where I'm saying, the first real examples of kind of comedy, and the Jailer, where Dennis Spooner sort of starts to take flight and, tells his, spying adventure in history, but brings his sort of comic sensibilities to it, where I'm going to now continue with my thesis and maybe skip over Marco Polo for now. And go, I love the way, by the way, that you don't have to put on a latex disguise or do much to, to fit in as 60s people in ancient Rome. You just have to brush Ian's hair. And I love that. It's just a little nod and it's just a little bit of fun. And I love these two. And just kiss him. Go on. Fall in love. Go on. You're away from school. We won't tell anybody. What happens in Rome stays in Rome. I love these two. But Spooner coming in and going, we can have a bit of fun with this, having had those wonderful philosophical, thoughtful, educational Reithian foundations laid by his predecessor as script editor David Whittaker, who I do think is an important architect, a key architect of Doctor Who. Quoting Shakespeare here. Quoting Mark Antony and Julius Caesar, and then Barbara's response, "Oh boy, that was a mistake," is terribly funny. They get hammered, don't they? I love that. But I think it was one of Doctor Who's strokes of fortune, is that having gone from the very sensible and intelligent and children's literature fluent David Whittaker, we then go to the cheeky, funny, colourful, perhaps slightly more lightweight in terms of ambition. Now, so I've seen some people saying that that's Nick Evans, by the way, missing his scabbard. I've always read that as him pretending, practicing his stabbing moves. Because he's not a very experienced slave trader / killer, and that's him being sort of beefing himself up and going, this is how I'm going to stab people. It's only recently I saw somebody go, and he keeps going to do his scabbard and then misses. Well, because there's a planned close up right at the end of the scene, and he's supposed to do that then. So again, the more generous interpretation is often the correct one, I think. Now, look, I don't glorify in portrayals of drunkenness, because alcohol is a very serious business and can cause many people great problems. But I love this. I think it's very funny. And there are few examples of drunkenness in Doctor Who, and this is perhaps the greatest of them. There is one in Colony in Space that I like, where a few actors decide to liven up a scene by playing it slightly pissed, and then another scene a bit later hungover, which I'm sure I will talk about when I do Colony in Space. O tempora o more. So Mores, he's now, having quoted Shakespeare, is now quoting Cicero. And I remember mentioning that to Christopher Barry and saying, did you feel the need to explain any of that when you're throwing in a bit of Latin into your children's tea time adventures? And he sort of basically went, kids were more educated in those days, which I had a lot of sympathy for. Is there such a thing? Did anyone do the classics these days? The stories are great, you see, and it's a fascinating language. I did Latin. I did Latin at O level, and I did very GCSE, and then I was going to do it for A level. And it was the same Latin teacher, although it was at a college up the road. And he basically said, you're only to do it if you're to take it seriously, Toby. And I was like, hang on, I got an A out. What? I remember the theatre studies teacher, when I told him that, said, don't do it because he's obviously marked your card already. You'll have a terrible time. So I did something else instead, but which is a shame. One teacher put you off doing a thing and change your course. I would have, because I like Latin, and I was all right at it. But it was good advice, I think, from the theatre studies teacher, Mr. Barge, who it was interesting to hear him to talk of another teacher like that. Just go, you shouldn't have done that, and you don't want to be doing that then. So I didn't. Although my future wife did. So I could have been, a mower matting her all that time, because there was only two of them ended up doing A-level Latin in the end. Anyway, why am I talking about that? Because he quoted Cicero, tempora o mores, which is a bit of Latin thrown in to early Doctor Who, the Romans, which we're watching, which is also, for all the, yes, it's appealing to educated children, has the farcical comedy stylings of Dennis Spooner, where they found a dead body in a hedge. I like this very simple road set, by the way, with enough lush greenery, and then the lighting here to make it night. It's simple, but it's effective. Striking looking actor here, Dennis Edwards, who, again, I remember there's a great picture of him and Ascaris as a full page picture in the Doctor Who The Early Years book, and it makes it look like he's a really important character, and that they're in a film, because a lot of those black and white design stills make some of this stuff look $1 million and like movie stills, and of course that's not what they are. And actually, I've recently watched this scene being giggled at by Bonnie Langford, who notices Dennis Edwards' helmet moves every time he talks, and I think it's in the Beyond the Sofa on the Blu-ray set. And they showed this clip at the BFI when the season 2 Blu-ray was launched, and Bonnie Langford's laughing at this hat moving up and down was infectious, and not normally the sort of thing I approve of. Going, you can ignore a hat moving up and down. Watch the scene. Watch the beauty of it. Watch the wonderful artistry of ancient television making. And of course, I need to get over myself, and absolutely did when Bonnie Langford's infectious hilarity at the wobbly helmet made that a very fun sequence, which is the only part of the Behind the Sofas I've seen. I haven't had a chance to watch any of the season 2 box set thus far, apart from the preview of the documentary that I made, just to make sure there was nothing in it I hated, and there was loads, and it was everything I was wearing and what I look like, and my hair and face and gait and posture, tone of voice, and everything I say and do. But other than that, I think it was pretty bloody marvellous. He gets lots of nice close-ups in this episode, I seem to recall, Dennis Edwards. And here's Edward Kelsey, who appears later in The Power of the Daleks and even later still in Creature from the Pit. All directed by Christopher Barry. He just plays slave trader here, where he spends, I think, most of his... He's, again, only in this episode. I think he has to do lots of baddie laughing acting, which is really hard to do, and I'm not sure he entirely gets away with it. But he's a great bushy-eyebrowed, prominently nosed actor who became famous in this country for playing Joe Grundy in the radio drama The Archers. And Joe Grundy was a farmer, and a great character, a sort of... The Grundy family are sort of lovable ne'er-do-wells. He was a sort of lovable rogue, Joe Grundy, and he took over the part from Hayden Jones, who is Vosper in The Mind of Evil, and they were mates. And Hayden Jones died, but I think had recommended Kelsey to the production team, or recommended Kelsey be in The Archers, and then it turned up he inherited the part from his friend. Hayden Jones is also the Autumn voice in Terror of the Autons. And Kelsey, who I corresponded with, who sent me a lovely letter when I did it's a piece I had in Doctor Who magazine where I had interviews with actors from Power of the Daleks, and it was Bernard Archard, Edward Kelsey and Robert James. And Edward Kelsey, sent me a lovely, lovely letter. And what was I saying about that? And I informed him of his place in Doctor Who history, because by dint of him appearing in Power of the Daleks, he is the first credited guest actor to appear on screen with more than one leading Doctor Who, if you see what I mean. He's the first guest performer to appear with more than one Doctor. So there we have it. So well done, Edward Kelsey. It's big. I think he goes off laughing now as well, and I think you hear him laughing as he disappears. And of course, this is the setup, isn't it? So Ian and Barbara were together, having already split up from the Doctor and Vicki, and now and this was always something that hit home to me in early Doctor Who, was that the danger is as much from the geography. So the idea, Ian rather lamely goes, "I'll look for you in Rome." That's like I said, "I'll look for you in London." Do you know what I mean? It's massive. And they don't have any other sort of form of communication device and don't know the place. They're suddenly needles in different haystacks scattered all about. They may as well be scattered across the cosmos. And look, this is interesting because it looks like Dennis Edwards as the Centurion is going to become a sort of major player. We don't see him again. We see him as a corpse next week, but it ain't Dennis Edwards. But that's another story. So this is the final bit we get at him. He's got an excellent face and a lovely sneer, and he was a nice actor and was still around in the early 2000s. But I don't think anybody ever wrote or corresponded with him, which is a shame. I should have done. Barry Jackson we must talk about as well, because he has a series of nice connections with Doctor Who, but all connecting must cease now, because that's the end of the episode. Oh, I did have plenty to say. But part of the farce of them all being split up is also part of the danger, as with Marco Polo, of that idea that that you have to be close to the TARDIS, otherwise you're in desperate trouble in this era in Doctor Who, because the landscape and the worlds that you inhabit are big and sprawling, and the idea that you might get back to the TARDIS in ancient Rome, when modes of transport take days, weeks, years to get you back to where you left, and the fact is you don't have maps, iPhones, or all any of those sorts of things, means that just the simple act of taking you away from your haven and splitting you up is as potentially deadly and disastrous and dangerous as anything else. And that makes the whole sort of universe and landscape of Hartnell era Doctor Who in particular dangerous in and of itself before you introduce plot and character. And I'm always taken by that, because it almost seems like, God, everything seems so impossible. The stakes are so high. But of course, and I didn't mention, I was wittering on about something else. The wonderful bit where Barbara goes to hit Sevchiria over the head with the vase and misses and hits Ian, and he does a sort of comedy. There's a bit of comedy. William Russell enjoys doing his comedy, woozy acting, either drunk or semi-conscious. There's that odd bit where Didius holds his sort of head up, and there's a slightly too long close-up of poor old William Russell having to keep going, I'm doing woozy now. But I love the slightly tipsy, tottering, lazing about, it has been said elsewhere, potentially post-coitally lazing about that Ian and Barbara are doing in the in the villa. I do love that. I do love. I'm watching a program at the moment, a totally different program on the BBC called Happy Valley, and one of the things that is superb about it is that I believe every single relationship, and it's not just the obvious stuff like the sisters and all that sort of stuff, which is very, very well done indeed, and has had a lot of very painstaking attention paid to it. But it's things like a relationship with a boss as they're walking down the corridor and having a quick chat, and you go, there's so much history there because of what the actors are doing, because of the writing, but the writing is so economic as well. And I think anything that makes you believe that these people know each other outside of this scene, and that there's a weight of history that's unspoken, and yet some kind of alchemy between writing and performance and chemistry of actors means you go, I believe that these people were hanging about with each other 5 years ago, and that what we're seeing now is an accumulation of that timeline. I always think it's very, very impressive, because when it's good, you don't notice it. And then when you do sort of suddenly notice it, you go, oh, wow, that is good, because it's good when it doesn't draw attention itself. It just does it organically, and as I say, with kind of alchemy. And I love the comfortableness with which William Russell and Jacqueline Hill conduct themselves. And I don't think they're... And I remember saying to William Russell during one commentary, I'm sure, I said, and of course, didn't Ian and Barbara get together? And he sort of went, no. And I was like, oh, really? Oh, come on. I desperately wanted him to say yes, and he just knocked it down. He did that a few times in commentaries for me, where I tried to get him to go with me on something, and he just didn't. And not unkindly. I just don't think we were on the same wavelength, which is a real shame. But he, he's a legend. I love him, and I love her. I never got the chance to meet her, but I think, So I'm not sure that they're necessarily suggesting anything there, but I am more than happy to impose unutterable love between unutterable. No, because that means maybe unspoken love between Ian and Barbara that will eventually blossom. But the beauty is that it blossoms when we don't see it, because that would spoil it, that would sully it. You never... That's the problem with will they or won't they. When they do, and they will, it immediately spoils, because potential is always more exciting than actuality. The experience of traveling, hopefully, is actually more gratifying than the experience of arriving. And I don't want to see Ian and Barbara arrive together, not even at the same time. So Josh has given me a clue as well. Josh there said he's choosing a scene from part 1 and then dialogue from parts 2, 3, and 4. Now, do I try and therefore match Josh and see if I can win this one, or do I be true to myself and go, but what am I, what do I, because I'm, one of my favorite things about this story is Derek Francis as Nero, and that's not a scene or a piece of dialogue. Well, actually, I don't have to worry about that for the moment, because I think I think my favourite bit is the Ian and Barbara woozy from drink. Slave traders come in. Barbara hits Ian over the head with the vase. I love it, and that speaks to. And I can sort of slightly cheat, because that scene speaks to what I think makes The Romans what it is its bold embracing of comedy without actually undermining the adventure serial element of Doctor Who, without undermining its seriousness of intent. Because what is it the third Doctor says? Somebody says, "Are you serious about what I do?" Yes, not necessarily about how I do it. And just because something is funny and comedic, it doesn't mean its intent is not serious. It doesn't mean its message is not serious. Now, I'm not saying there's a message to the Romans, but it does have an educational element. The stuff that school children watching will have benefited from: a bit of Shakespeare, a bit of Cicero, Latin, but also just having it set in Roman times and having slave auctions and togas and those costumes and centurions, and the doctors chat about pipes, not having pipes but having aqueducts instead, so that you do have the educational remit of Doctor Who there, but not in a po-faced way. And again, something can be educational without being deadly serious. Now, there's nothing more embarrassing than a teacher trying to be wacky and funny, so I can understand those who might go, well, I prefer my history lessons to be a bit more sober, but I actually like my history lessons being a bit drunk in a villa. So I think, and I think because it's an important development, the Spooner voice, that means that Doctor Who, acquires and embraces that sort of comedic seam in its DNA, and it's Doctor Who's sense of humour has often been the saving of it. I don't agree that Doctor Who is good because it's bad. I don't agree that Doctor Who is good because it's aware of its own, it sends itself up. It's tongue in cheek. I don't believe that. I believe it can sometimes acknowledge its own stupidity, but not cynically, because it is a daft premise, but it embraces it lovingly. It revels in it, but without ever undermining the seriousness that has to accompany it in order for it to be an exciting and engaging drama. And the Romans goes as far into comedy as perhaps Doctor Who ever can, and yet it still has the serious adventuring stuff. And I think it balances that quite nicely. And I think that comedic voice, if Doctor Who hadn't had that, I don't think it would have lasted. A lot of our favourite moments of Doctor Who and what the character does is that being this eccentric alien allows the Doctor to have funny reactions and to sometimes be a bit clueless, but also equally to sometimes be, cunning, to outmaneuver us, to sometimes play the fool in order to disguise their great intelligence. So lots going on. The comedy of the Romans speaks to a lot about the whole of the DNA of Doctor Who. And I think I interrupted myself. I got a message from my friend Johnny Camden last night going, I thought the Romans were supposed to be a duffer. I'm watching it and I'm having a great time. And I went, no, I don't think. I said, I think some people don't, worry about the comedy angle of it. And it was funny. He was another one, and Josh alluded to this in the intro, who'd been led to believe that everybody thinks the Romans is a bit crap. And was delighted by how brilliant it is. But I think there's a bit more of an appetite, and I sense this from some of the younger fans as well, having gone to the BFI to watch the Time Meddler. It was great to see, and I read sometimes, and I see younger fans talking about Hartnell, and they love him, but they particularly love him when he's being funny and when he's being daft and when he's being dotty. And I think maybe I grew up in the shadow of Doctor Who be wanting to be taken very seriously, and I wanted Doctor Who to be very taken seriously, because if it wasn't taken seriously, it might be axed, or people might laugh at me or mock my love of it. So it was important that it wasn't a children's programme and that it was very serious. And of course now when I see people taking Doctor Who too seriously, I go, no, you're killing it. You're killing it with your desire for it to be so important and so serious, and for it to be commenting on everything every time. Every single line can't be a throwaway line. It has to be some kind of problematic issuing, or some reinforcement of something very moral. It's a fun and zany adventure at its best. And actually, that's when you can make the serious points, because you've won people over with charm and with humour, and which is why often the British sense of humour works so well with when it's working on both of those levels. But in order to do that, the fun has to be infectious first. And we're living in a time now, interestingly, where comedians I think it's not an unfair observation that some say a lot of comedians now want a round of applause for saying something on the button rather than being funny. And I think sometimes, there's some talk about where comedy is important, and comedy needs to not just be funny, it needs to be about something. I'm convinced by that argument. Yes, comedy, worthwhile comedy can be about something and can be making an important point, but you can go so far and go, well, you're doing all of that, but you've forgotten the first bit, which is the comedy bit, and making people laugh to lure them in, and then you've got them, and then you can do all the other stuff. Is not to be underestimated, and it's a balancing act. And the Romans, tips the balance in favour of comedy quite a lot. But there is still, it's not Blackadder. It's it still has quite a lot of all the stuff with Ian and Delos is played absolutely straight. And Nero is a larger than life character anyway. So whether he's meant to be funny or not, he was always going to be slightly oddball and OTT, even without this story's deliberate comic intent. So what I'm saying is comedy is important. It's also not easy. It's not to be underestimated, and it is a key element of this story and that scene that is entertaining in of itself, but then has resonance throughout the rest of the story, and of course, initiates the farcical element of all of our characters being split up and just missing each other, which will come into the fore in later episodes, and which is delightful. So it's the ripple is caused by not a pebble, but by a smashed vase over a science teacher's head. So I'm going to go for that scene in the villa, which has been slightly sneaky on me because Josh did say that they were going to choose a scene. So let's see if that's the right scene.
My favourite moment from the first episode is from the scene where Ian and Barbara are lounging about, and Barbara tricks Ian into going to the fridge to get something, and obviously there is no fridge. It's one of those moments that I love most in classic Doctor Who, especially the William Hartnell era, when they have those moments of quiet time where they can sit down and have a little chat, and there's something really magical about it. And you can just tell that everyone on set is just having a really good time. And when you can tell that actors are having a good time, the audience will have a good time.
Yes, I'd missed that with all my chatter. It is a great moment when she sends him to the fridge. But I did allude to that in the commentary, didn't I? That I do. It's totally counterintuitive. I do love the fact that this story starts with the idea that they haven't been having an adventure. It just makes it more believable to me. He says in a farce about Roman times, but it and the cliffhanger in between each story does suggest an overarching an adventure in time and space. It's not a series of adventures, it's an adventure in time and space, which is why one story leads to another in the whole adventure, i.e. the whole canon of Doctor Who is one big adventure. But so that's my love-hate relationship with the inter-story cliffhangers. I love them because they're an anomaly, they're different, they're a thing that was in the early series and stopped being a regular thing. We still get the occasional one throughout the show, but was a stylistic thing, as with the individual episode titles, that was phased out. So that also makes it a sort of winning part of the early development of the show that we see disappear, although never quite. And actually, some of those end of stories leading into the other stories carry on longer than we like to think sometimes, because I think again, collectively in our mind's eye it's phased out with the individual episode titles, but actually quite a lot of those Underwater Menace leads into Moonbase leads into Macroterra, and various other examples, Enemy into Web. So but Dominators into Mind Robber, so you think, oh yes, they phased those out with the episode. Oh no, actually they didn't. And we even get them, into End of Forge Doomsday, into Kinder, and there've been modern stories where there's been a sort of more continuous narrative as well. So even though I think of Doctor Who as a series of single adventures, it's not. It's a richer, continuous tapestry, and more starkly so in those early days, which was really interesting to find out as a fan going back. When I first started watching, went, oh my god, okay, I didn't realise that one adventure led into another. So that was part of the archaeology of enjoying Doctor Who. You find out a thing that wasn't actually as much part of the show when I grew up watching it as it had been in the history that I then went on to discover, and what a joy it is to uncover history. As Doctor Who's creators, they had a different kind of history in mind, envisions. But so yes, I like that, but I also take the point my friend made of going, but it's less believable if it's one piece of jeopardy after another. But this does both cleverly. It has the cliffhanger that leads into the story, that what makes you want to come back after watching the rescue, and then just goes, actually that was just don't worry about that. TARDIS fell off a cliff. They're fine. And they've been here for ages. And isn't this a bit more believable? And isn't this a bit more of a relaxing start, which we're then going to upset? We're going to lull them into a false sense of security. And that helps with the drama and the storytelling, but also means that we have those lovely moments. We love being with these guys, and because they're all so good. And I agree with Josh that we like watching actors have fun. It's not as simple as that, because if actors are having fun and forgetting that we'd like to have some too, that can seem a little bit self-indulgent and a little bit smug. But that isn't the case here. But again, it's not, when it's done well, it's sometimes worth pointing out that, we only like it because they're good at it, and that it's not guaranteed to be something we would enjoy watching unless it's done by deft, skilled and likeable people, which that quartet definitely is. I think I might be in a bit of trouble with Josh here. It would be nice if I. So I've got three bits of dialogue for episodes 2, 3, and 4, and then a scene for the overall thing. Well, I have a scene in this that I think is amazing, and also wrong, and funny, and also not a bit naughty, but we will get to that. I wonder if I can anticipate what Josh's bonus thing would be, which is a scene. Dialogue, I can't, and it's actually quite hard to do dialogue when I'm doing this, because obviously I'm talking over it. And in fact, I've just remembered there's that brilliant bit when when the Doctor's talking to Vicki after he's spoken to the. Oh, there's so many good bits of dialogue. I like it, when she says, I watch all the liars, isn't it? When when the Doctor is lying to the Centurion, that's great. And then when she goes, you don't even know what your name is, do you? And he goes, yes, my name is. And then the Centurion goes, Maximus Battalion. And he goes, yeah, there we go. That comic interplay. So yes, amongst the farce and the physical comedy of smashed vases and hoisting people over your shoulders and all that wordplay in that scene between the Doctor and Vicki and the Centurion is cracking, is great. Lovely. So let's not forget that either. So there is going to be dialogue, but it's hard for me because I nearly did that whole commentary without mentioning those bits, which I love, because they register less when I'm chatterboxing throughout. But I have to chatterbox throughout because this is a commentary and you're not allowed to have clips or hear the episode. You have to have this witted monologue without and if I don't say anything, you just get silence. And whatever this is albeit only marginally better than silence when it comes to a podcast. So anyway, I've got a tough task ahead of me to identify bits of dialogue from the next 3 episodes. But let's see what happens, because the road I'm travelling on is going to take me to episode 2 of The Romans. And as we know, all roads lead to Rome. Well, thank you ever so much for listening to Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Haydoke, and my special guest, Josh Snares, who can be found on Twitter at Josh_Snares, and they also have a YouTube channel, youtube.com/Josh Snares. I'm grateful to the many patrons who make these podcasts possible, and they include Kitty Placati, Leanne Potts, Liam Price, Ian Radford, Peter Reed, Paula Reynolds, Mary Robertson, Alex Rowan, Darren Rule, John Rumfit, Gavin Rymil, Tom Selinsky, Matt Sawyer, Nick Salmond, Edward Salt, Samuel, Keith Say, Frank Shales, Christopher Sharp, John Sheehan, Brian Sinclair, Trevor Smith, Richard Smith, Andrew Snedden, David Spencer, Matthew Speddings, David Spofford, Chris Stokes, Adam Stone and Mark Swan. The music is by Dave Gates, the artwork by Dylan Patterson. How would you like your name to be read out like those names were just then? Oh, Toby, I can't think of anything I'd like more. Well, for a mere £3 a month, that can happen, because that's one of the perks of being a patron at patreon.com/Toby Haydoke, or putting your hat in front of you as you busk on cyberspace, as that's what it really is. But it's the way of doing things. It's the way a lot of we self-employed creatives had to turn during the pandemic and have continued to sort of make part of what we do for our livelihood now. Hopefully it means some of the gatekeepers for our artistic endeavours have no longer, are the only people that have to open ways to audiences for us, but it does mean that we have to sort of catch our eye and point to our empty hats or a cap full of 2p's or £3, because that's where the lowest tier starts. £3 a month at patreon.com/Toby Haydoke, and you get bonus releases, early releases, exclusive releases, stuff that's just for you. 3 releases per week also on the Patreon page, and that doesn't include the pictures of my dog, which are kind of sneaky underground number 4. And you also get 10% off the £3 a month, or there are higher tiers with lures, but all of the actual recorded material is available for the lowest tier, but you get a 10% discount if you sign up for a year. Times are tough, and that monthly commitment may not be your bag, in which case you can go to ko-fi.com/Toby Haydoke, where instead of throwing pennies into my hat, you watch me packing up my guitar and you say, "Do you want to go for a coffee, mate?" And you buy me a coffee. Although then you'd probably have to talk to me, whereas this way you can just sort of leave the coffee there and shuffle off without catching my eye and having to make small talk with me. Anyway, I think that's enough metaphors for me basically saying, yes, if you'd like to give me some money. It's such an awkward thing to do. Anyway, done now. And I know times are tough. I know, utility bills have gone absolutely ludicrous. And so I'm just happy if these ramblings of mine give you some entertainment during tough times, and free entertainment when things are a bit lean is what it's all about. And if that's what I'm giving you, I am more than happy. I am happy that you listen to this. I'm happy that you're still listening now, because really the fun is over. Although I do have a fact to impart in the post-credits bit, so if you've never stayed for one before, this might be the one to do. But what costs you nothing is to go to YouTube. Well, not YouTube. Don't go to YouTube. I mean, you can go to YouTube, but before you go there, go to iTunes and Podbean and Spotify and all the places that you consume podcasts. Give these Toby Haydoke's Time Travels 5 stars and perhaps a couple of lines of review so that people know what they're getting, and to, help these to stand out from the crowd of many podcasts out there, and many Doctor Who podcasts, many of which are absolutely fantastic. So a helping hand is always very gratefully received. I'm a professional stand-up comedian. Are you really? Etc. I do a comedy club in Manchester every Tuesday called At Excess Malarkey. No, it's called Excess Malarkey. At Excess Malarkey is what its Twitter feed is called. Excess Malarkey. I think it's more efficient than my brain-to-mouth coordination is at the moment. I'm also on Twitter, @TobyHaydoke. That's not my name. I don't pronounce the "at" as the great comedian Noel James would say about. Let's not get into that, but I acknowledge him as the provenance for that observation. And @Haydoke Podcasts is the Twitter feed for these podcasts. I'm going to do damage limitation by not saying anymore, because when I say things, it all seems to go wrong right now. So here's the post-credits bit. I record these, the titles, as it were, sometime after I've done the commentary and edited it all together, and then I do this at the end, including the introduction. That's all a separate track done right at the end when it's all been put together. And so I've had reason today to be wishing a friend of mine happy birthday, John Deere, who is writing a book about the ghost stories for Christmas and is on the recent BFI Blu-ray release of Ghost Stories for Christmas, which, if you haven't got, he's done commentaries and notes and all sorts on it. So he's doing very well. And it's his birthday as I record this today, which is the 16th of January. And so as part of his birthday celebrations, I sent him a list of people who he shared his birthday with. And one of those is Margot Thomas, who plays the stall holder in episode 1 of The Romans that we have just done. And he went innocently, "Oh, does that mean it was her birthday on the day it went out?" And I went, "Oh, yes, of course, because I know that the rescue is on my birthday, which is the 2nd of January. So it's like, oh, so 2 weeks later, and yes, episode 1 of The Romans went out on the 16th of January, which is when I'm recording this. So, what is it, 2023? No, so 58 years later. Who'd have thought it? Nobody, because it's actually not that much of a great cosmic coincidence. But I quite like the fact that I was wishing John happy birthday on Margot Thomas's birthday on the day that I was doing Margot Thomas's episode of Happy Times and Places. So there we are. Isn't that fun? I mean, it's what passes for fun this far post the credits in a free podcast. This is, if you're having any more fun than this, I think you need to be, I think you're probably in some sort of municipal building or party or actual, film. But anyway, there we go. That's the currency we're spending here. Happy birthday, Margot Thomas. So what I'm saying is, what that means is, the fact, sorry, it says coming back. The whole point of this bit that I nearly forgot was that on Margot Thomas's birthday, she was on telly in The Romans. So I wonder if she had a birthday party. They went, should we just put on BBC One to see what I've been up to? So yeah, Margot Thomas's birthday present to herself might well have been getting all her friends who've come round to watch The Romans at her house. I have no idea. I never met her. I think Nick Peck did, though. I think he said he worked with her in theatre once. So, she was born in 1919. So 29, 39, 49, 59. It would have been her 45th, because it's 1964, The Romans, isn't it? It's 1960. No. It's 1965. It's 1965. Idiot. Brain fart. That's the sort of thing that can, cause whole forums to explode if you make that sort of mistake somewhere. 1965, The Romans. So she would have been 40. It would have been her 46th birthday when The Romans went out. Her episode of The Romans went out on her 46th birthday. Wow. I don't know what that means, but it's not a new fact. Her birthday was out there, and the day of The Romans being on was out there. But I've never put two and two together that somebody from The Romans was in it, and when it was broadcast, it was their birthday. And I do know that fact now, and I feel better for knowing that. And if you don't, then you've got no soul.